Barka da yammaci,
Yawa,
ya aiki.
ta godiya.
That's great. All right. Viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Good day and welcome to this episode of Global Arena, what I call Global Arena Unscripted. This is because I have not scripted much. I have not followed the conventional way of scripting my shows, the introduction, the lengthy questions, and the facts, and so on and so forth. It just came up as something abrupt, unexpected, that we had to sit down with Professor John Edward Phillips to talk about something that is normally not covered by our media, a country that is normally not looked into deeply by most of our media organizations in this part of the world. Professor John Edward Phillips is an American emeritus professor of African history based in Hirosaki University in Japan. And he recently spent 4 weeks in Thailand. So this is the country I'm talking about. We don't know much about Thailand except the fact that before the coming of President Muhammadu Buhari, we used to import a lot of rice from Thailand. Probably that's the only thing that we know about Thailand. And then a little bit of some facts about the country, maybe. Somebody would say, what's the capital city of the country? It's Bangkok. But even the Bangkok name is not normally known by many people. So we have got Professor John Edward Phillips to talk us through some of the most interesting things that he has seen and observed in his latest visit to Thailand. And I've got to understand that Thailand has been a dreamland for him. He had been prior to his visit, wanting to visit the country for long. And at the end of the day, he got that opportunity. He went there. So we're just going to have a bit of a conversation with him to hear from him what he saw, what he had seen in his visit. Well, Professor, I don't have to spend much of your time doing this introduction. Let me just welcome you to the show.
Well, thanks for inviting me back. It's been a while, but I've always
Sure.
enjoyed being on your show, so it's an honor and a pleasure to be back here. One
Sure.
correction, though, I was not a professor of African history. I was a professor of international society, and I taught U.S. history and an interdisciplinary course on African studies, in addition to English classes and various other things.
All right, good. Thank you very much for the correction, and it's noted. Are you still lecturing? Are you still teaching at Hirosaki University?
No, I'm completely retired. I haven't been back there for a few years. Of course, during the COVID, once I got back here, I haven't been out very much, even in town. But
Yeah.
I guess in East Asia, we had much more of a COVID scare than people in Africa. South Korea was pretty much locked down. North Korea is locked down anyway, but then they got even more drastically locked down. And China, they had that zero COVID policy for a while until the society, I guess, was about to crack.
So you're saying that they're still afraid of the COVID-19 and there are some COVID restrictions still going on in some of these countries, those countries in Asia?
Yeah, the COVID restrictions are coming to an end in Japan here, and in Thailand, they were really opening up to tourists. I was asking an American friend of mine who retired there what if it had gotten back to what it was before COVID, and he said he thinks the tourism is already beyond what it was before COVID. You still see a lot of people wearing masks, and there is a concern about COVID, but it's not the kind of panic that there was during the peak of the COVID crisis.
Yeah. Do you wear masks personally?
I do indoors, yes. Outdoors, it doesn't seem to spread as much outdoors, but indoors in a crowd or something on a bus, maybe, I will definitely wear a mask.
But why would you wear a mask indoors? That means at home, right?
No, 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 not at home. I mean, when I go to the store, I went to the store today, so I took a mask with me and put it on in the store. And then when I got out, I took it off again. It
Okay.
apparently COVID spreads in close contact indoors, and as long as there's good ventilation, it doesn't spread so much. It doesn't seem to spread outdoors as much. One of the reasons in temperate climates, colds are associated with winter to the extent that they're called colds. In Japanese, it's called a wind, kaze. But
Mm-hmm.
this is because in the temperate climates, the winter is the cold season, so people are indoors much more often, and they're next to each other and spreading diseases, especially respiratory diseases like colds. Um, so that colds and flus tend to peak in the winter. It probably will be the same thing with COVID. I mean, it looks like we're going to have COVID around for a long time, and it's a serious disease, particularly for older people like me. So,
Yeah. All right. Yeah, of course. So do you still briefly, I just want to move on from this issue of COVID to our main conversation. Do you still have cases of COVID-19 in Japan, for example?
oh, absolutely, and they're reported every night on the evening news. They give the numbers broken down by prefectures, not only of cases but of deaths, and it has declined dramatically from the peaks.
But still people
It's a
die
matter of
of
concern.
COVID-19.
Sorry?
But still people die from COVID-19.
Yes. People
That's
also
really
die from
bad.
influenza. We don't think of influenza as a serious disease that there's panic about, but they give annual flu shots in Japan. I get a flu shot every year at the beginning of the flu season in the fall. And I just recently got my letter for the next vaccination of COVID-19. And I already have 4 vaccinations, which I had to show when I came back from Thailand at the airport. And I'll be getting a 5th in a month or so.
All right. So speaking of Thailand, let's kick off with a little bit of facts about the country. Um, I'm sure, I don't know, but I will ask you this question. Why were you in Thailand? Why did you visit Thailand and
What
spend
got me
4 weeks?
interested in it? Well, one factor is that Vietnam Airlines had a very cheap flight that I could use my accumulated miles for, and it actually cost less than 10% of the miles that I had accumulated. Um, so it cost me almost nothing to get there. And I had always wanted to see Thailand. In elementary school, I did a report on Thailand, and I was fascinated with this country on the other side of the world where people dance with their hands and box with their feet. I mean, it seemed to be all upside down. Later,
Yeah,
in junior high school, I read Anna and the King of Siam. It's the book that the musical The King and I was based on. And it's again, it's a fascinating place. The book has been accused of exaggerating Anna's, I can't remember her last name, exaggerating her role at the court. She was sort of a nanny for some of the royal children. She was in charge of educating them in English and Western ways.
all
But I've kind of followed the news from Thailand. The late King Bhumipol was a famous jazz musician. I don't know if
right.
you're aware of that, but he recorded with Benny Goodman and other jazz greats. You can go to YouTube and download some of his.
Yeah.
Uh,
American musicians. What did he record with the American musicians?
yes,
So he's liberal. He's Western.
he was very outgoing and modernizing. He's extremely popular too. I think he's was more popular than the current king. Very often, unfortunately, the monarchy has become an issue in politics for various reasons that we can go into. But I did notice that a lot of people who support the monarchy, more often they would have pictures of the late King Bhumipal than the current king. But he very strongly decided to be a ceremonial monarch. And the new king has also pretty much stayed out of politics. He sat out COVID. The new king sat out the COVID scare in a resort hotel in Germany, and was basically incommunicado with anybody. But the monarchy has become a symbol, and particularly the lese majesty laws. Criticism of the king or other members of the royal family is actually a crime in Thailand, and it's punishable by
So
up
yeah,
to
you said
10 years in prison.
criticism of the monarchy is a crime in the country. Who gets to punish those that criticize the monarchy, for example?
Well, they
Is
get
it the
taken to
prime minister
court.
or the military guys?
They get taken to court, and there was a trial going on, a lese majesty trial, while I was in Thailand. It was big news in the various newspapers, and people were following it because this whole question of insulting the king. The king is considered a god legally, and
All right. Hold on. You said the king is considered a god
yes,
there in the country, but they are said to be Buddhists. They follow the religion of Buddhism, even though, according to what I've read, to them, Buddhism is more like a way of life, quote unquote, than a religion as the Muslims practice their religion. For example, we practice our religion as a religion, and
yeah.
Christians also practice.
It's not about
So,
God, but Buddhism accepts the existence of the Hindu gods. And in fact, the cult of Ganesh, the elephant god, is very big. You could see statues of Ganesh in various places in Thailand. Buddhism is about something completely different. It's about the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path. But it certainly doesn't deny the existence of the gods, although it is possible to be a Buddhist atheist. And I've known Buddhist atheists. But
oh, really? So
yeah,
they criticize the religion of Buddhism.
well, that's the whole
Those,
question. Whether is it a religion? Is it a philosophy? Is it a way of life? The whole definition of religion, religion is not exactly what the Hausa word adini means.
okay, yeah.
I mean, adini is basically the Abrahamic religions, the God of
Mm-hmm.
Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob,
Yeah.
Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. That's adini.
Yes.
And there is, I guess what you would call kaparanchi is
Yeah.
this.
Kaparanchi.
Yeah, okay, but
Kapurchi.
that's not Buddhism either. There's this post-Neolithic kind of nature cult from West Africa and Western Europe across the Middle East, India, China, and East Asia. It's about fertility and water sources, either springs or rivers, sacred places and shrines. Hinduism is the form that took in India. And Buddhism was in a very real way an intellectual revolt against that kind of religion. There effectively have been two major religious revolts against that kind of belief system.
So you're saying that Buddhism emerged from Hinduism, right?
Yes, and in a Hindu context. So it doesn't argue about the existence of the Hindu gods. I mean, but it's a completely different thing. It's not about the gods.
So a Buddhist can be a Hindu, right?
Yes and
Yeah.
no. I mean, because look, there have been, especially in medieval India, there were long wars between Hindus and Buddhists. And now I know I've talked to some of the religious studies professors in Nigeria who tell me their students have a hard time understanding the difference between Hinduism and Buddhism.
Mm.
And I said, well, you know, the Japanese have a hard time understanding the difference between Islam and Christianity. I mean, to them, it seems almost the same thing. Well, when you write down in it, my Buddhism professor defined the difference, really the essential difference between Hinduism and Buddhism, as that Hinduism believes in the absolute is being, and kind of capital B being, whereas in Buddhism it's non-being. Non-being is the source of being. So that I would come down to the philosophical difference.
Mm.
But you know, the terrible violence they had in Sri Lanka with the liberation tigers of Tamil Eelam. The government was
Tamil tigers?
in Sri Lanka. I'm
Tamil tigers?
the Tamil tigers in Sri Lanka were officially a ethno-nationalist Tamil group fighting against the Sinhalese majority. Now, the Sinhalese are Buddhists. The Tamils were and are mostly Hindu, but they have a large Muslim minority. The Muslim minority wanted nothing to do with the liberation tigers of Tamil Eelam because they had suicide bombers. You know, suicide is absolutely horrifically forbidden in Islam. And that's one of the things that really freaks a lot of Muslims out about groups like Al-Qaeda, you know, that do suicide bombing. It's an extremely un-Islamic thing. But this meant that the effective line of demarcation between the Tamil tigers and the government was religion rather than ethnicity. And it could be seen as a continuation of those medieval wars between Hindus and Buddhists.
All right. Yeah. So that's a very complex historical
complex
fact.
situation.
Yeah, definitely.
But Buddhism is a very
so
complex religion too. I mean, it's older than
definitely, and that's why
Christianity.
probably it's more connected to philosophy than religion, as you said.
Yeah, it's not about the worship of the gods.
It's more about thinking.
It's about a
thinking.
practice. Sometimes it's been defined as a state of consciousness.
Yeah, so that's what makes it more complex. Shall we move on to the issue of culture, Prof?
Sure.
Or you have more thing to say?
I did have one other point which might be interesting to your audience. It's a well-known fact in Indian history that after Buddhism was essentially wiped out in India, the areas of India that had been heavily Buddhist became heavily Muslim. Now, some scholars of Indian history will argue that this is a coincidence. It doesn't mean anything. Others will argue that there was mass conversion of Buddhists to Islam when Islam came into India. And there are a number of social things in common between Buddhism and Islam. They both preach against caste.
Could you elaborate?
Yeah, they both preach against caste. You know,
caste
Hinduism
system.
is very much involved in the caste system. There are 4 major castes and hundreds, maybe thousands of subordinate castes. Both Buddhism and Islam preach against alcohol. Alcohol is totally forbidden to monks in Buddhism. They don't have prohibition in Thailand. They have very good beer, in fact. But it's totally forbidden to monks, and they have signs on the temples warning tourists not to take alcoholic drinks into the temple because it's totally forbidden in there. So there are a number of social things that Buddhism and Islam have in common that arguably may have led many former Buddhists in India after the suppression of Buddhism to join Islam instead. As I said, that's a controversial theory among scholars of Indian history.
Yeah.
But it is certainly it's a plausible theory, and
yeah.
But
the fact remains that there were so many Buddhists that converted to Islam at that time.
Well, we don't know that. We don't have documentation on that. That's why this theory is controversial. The fact is that the areas of India where Buddhism was strong, including the Northwest, what's now Pakistan, Bengal, which is now
Bangladesh.
Bangladesh, and also in the South. Those are the areas that became heavily Muslim.
Yeah, South, Nepal. You're talking about Nepal or Sri Lanka?
No, Nepal is the north.
Okay, Nepal is in the north, yeah.
Tamil Nadu. And that's also the area where the traditional Christians in India are, the St. Thomas Christians.
Yeah, Tamil Nadu is in southern India, right?
Right, yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
but
sure.
I did want to make that one point, but you're right, we need to get back to Thailand if we're going to talk about my trip. So that's
sure.
a little background on Buddhism. And
of course, which is very much connected to our topic of discussion.
Right.
So,
and which nobody in Nigeria knows anything about. So
yeah, definitely. So we're feeding them with this knowledge for the very first time, right?
Okay, yeah, I hope they enjoy that.
Sure. Yeah, let's hope so. So about the culture, Professor, I have got to understand that the culture in Thailand is a mix of strong Indian influences, Chinese traditions, and elements that are uniquely Thai. With its diverse geography, friendly people, and the stunning serenity, the stunning scenery, the quote-unquote land of a thousand smiles is a must-see destination in Southeast Asia. I just read this. I just got this piece of information from the internet. How true is this based on what
That's absolutely true. Yeah, it's absolutely true. It's a fascinating country. It's a wonderful, welcoming destination for tourists. They have all kinds of tourists. I mean, it is notorious for sex tourism, but I wasn't there for that. They have plenty of ecotourism. The elephants. I remember one proprietor at a hotel where I stayed wanted to know if I wanted to see the elephants. And I said, no, look, I've been to Africa. I've been up close with those big African elephants. I don't need to see the little Asian elephants.
So the African elephants are much bigger than the Asian or Thai elephants.
They're much bigger and they're much wilder. One of the reasons people go to Thailand to see elephants is that they are very tame and domesticated, in fact. But this is true of the Asiatic elephants in general. I think it's an amazing thing that the Carthaginians were able to use elephants as war animals, whereas the India, Thailand, etc., the smaller Asiatic elephant, the domestic elephant, is used as a war elephant. But
yeah. So did you see the influence of the Indian culture in Thailand when you went there? I mean,
absolutely,
is it still relevant?
Yeah. I think I mentioned
still dominated?
I think I mentioned the god Ganesh, who's also very big in Thailand, the elephant god. And the writing system is ultimately based on the syllabic script from India. Buddhism is a religion that originated in India and then spread all over, not just Southeast Asia, but China, Japan, Korea. There very definitely is a heavy influence of India.
What about in terms of food and in terms of language?
The language is different, although the writing system is ultimately derived from India, but it's not an Indo-European language. It's its own language with its own script. The cuisine is it's a rice-based cuisine, like southern India, I guess, and curries were common food. It's very spicy. But that's true of the tropics in general, I think.
Yeah.
That you like spicy food in the tropics. I found that they've got so many tourists, particularly from Europe and Japan and other countries that aren't used to spicy food that I sometimes had to specifically ask to get spicy food. Thai food was very popular in the States before I moved to Japan, and still very few Thai restaurants in Japan. So one of the things I was definitely looking to do was to finally eat Thai food. And they do have they had passable Italian food, passable Mexican food, Chinese food. Of course, there's a lot of Chinese immigration all over Southeast Asia. The Thai restaurant I used to go to regularly when I last lived in Los Angeles was run by a Chinese Thai family. And
Yeah.
the proprietor of one of my hotels, actually the guy who asked me about elephants was Chinese Thai. And some of this immigration is hundreds of years old. The Chinese
Yeah,
tend to
the
form a
Chinese
merchant
Thais
class.
that you have met,
Yeah,
do they speak Chinese or the Thai language?
they speak both. And there's a lot of Chinese tourists too. Geez, there were tourists from all over. There's actually a Koreatown in Bangkok, and my hotel in Bangkok was just a few blocks away from the Koreatown, where there are a lot of a lot of Koreans, and there are a lot of Chinese doing business. There's been continual Chinese immigration through Southeast Asia for hundreds of years. You know, they tend to form a merchant class in Malaysia and Indonesia, as well as in Thailand and Vietnam. But there were tourists from the Middle East, India. I had a very good Ethiopian dinner at an Ethiopian restaurant. There were two Ethiopian restaurants right next to each other, and I didn't have time to eat at more than one. But it was very good Ethiopian food.
You ate? You had dinner there?
Yeah.
So they reminded you of your time in Africa?
Actually, they kind of reminded me of my time in Washington, D.C., because I lived in D.C. in the early 70s, just after the revolution in Ethiopia. Of course, anytime anybody else has a revolution, there's a wave of immigrants to the United States. And the first thing any wave of immigrants does is open a restaurant. You get grandma in the back kitchen, turning out some home cooking, and then everybody in the neighborhood wants to find out what this new exotic food is. So when I lived in Washington, D.C., there were Ethiopian restaurants all over town, and I got a taste for Ethiopian food. But anyway, as far as I know, those were the only two Ethiopian restaurants in Bangkok, but it's a very cosmopolitan city. I think I mentioned that jazz has become part of Thai culture.
Well, Professor, thank you very much indeed. This is the first episode of my series of interviews with you regarding or on your latest visit to Thailand. I'm looking forward to hooking up to you next very soon in the next episode, so that we will continue talking about more and more important issues regarding your visit to Thailand. Thank you very much, Professor.
All right. Thank you for having me, and I'll talk to you soon.